Hey there, Diocese of the Rio Grande. Well, I'm back from sabbatical, back from time away. I actually kind of had an on-ramp in August, and I've been back for a couple of weeks. Just finished the clergy conference with the diocese, which was a joyful time. But I wanted to reactivate the weekly updates and to begin by sharing with you a little bit about the sabbatical, what I've been thinking about, and what's been moving in my heart. I want to first begin by talking about sabbatical and what it is. Just a reminder, if you've never known somebody who's been on sabbatical, sabbatical comes from the word Sabbath, which means rest. Sabbath, of course, is a commandment. It's one of the big 10. It's as important to God as thou shalt not murder. So Sabbath is a big deal, and it's important, and I guess that we're all probably not very good at it, which is why God needs to make it a commandment. Sabbath, we're supposed to take for a full day every 7 days. Is that how your life is organized? Sabbath, the way the Hebrew people, the way the Jewish people observe it, is an actual thing where you prepare beforehand to rest. Whatever food you're going to eat, you cook it beforehand so you don't cook on the Sabbath. You spend time on the Sabbath with your family. You can read, you can rest, you can relax, you can eat, but you're not supposed to do work. We're not very good at that. But Sabbath time is important. It is about rest. But this Sabbath, I came into a further, for me, deeper understanding of the nature of what God means by Sabbath. And I think we can use two English words to talk about Sabbath in a way that helps deepen our understanding, but also puts a little bit finer point on what we're talking about. Often when we think Sabbath, we use the English word rest. And there's certainly rest in there, right? Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. You shall do no work. Doing no work we think of as rest. But one of the things that I was reading this summer said to me that there is a difference between rest and leisure. I think both rest and leisure are combined in the concept of Sabbath as I see it in the Bible and as I've experienced it in my life. Let me break it down for you. The difference between rest and leisure, totally making up Sabbath, both of which you need. The article I read suggested that rest is just what is necessary to do work again. We need rest. You got to sleep or else you're not going to make it through the next day. Rest, I think, as we often think about it, is simply I'm going to take a break. I'm going to lie down. I'm going to have a nap. I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to have a vacation. And that rest really is going to be what is going to get me ready to work again. But if that's all you've got in your life is work and then a period of rest to get you ready to work again, then I think we're missing the point of what Sabbath is about, and also a point about what human living is about. This life that God has given you is not only about work. This life that God has given you is not just rest so you can work hard again. It's not just rest so you'll get stronger. God wants you to have Sabbath because God wants you to have what we often call leisure time. What is leisure time? Do you even remember what leisure time is like? Have you had leisure time recently? We used to, in this country, have things like we call baseball the national pastime. It's not about the national work time. There's no clock on it. It's a way to pass an afternoon in a relaxed, kind of leisurely sort of a way. We used to have times where there was long periods of boredom in summer vacation for kids. I remember being bored out of my mind for much of the summer and my mom saying like, well, go find something to do then. That kind of longer stretches of time without demands on our time is what leisure is. And wonderful things happen when we allow our minds to wander. If you can remember lying under the trees and looking at the clouds and figuring out what the shapes are in those clouds, that's leisure time. If you're reading through a book and you have time to stop and ponder what you've just read, that's leisure time. If you and your family are just kind of hanging out, that's leisure time. In fact, the term hang out is, I think, the closest we get to real leisure in the way we live today. My grown-up kids often say, what are you going to do? I'm just going to hang out. And I'm like, yeah, but what are you going to do? What they're talking about is a need for leisure time, a need for low activity, which is not the same as no activity. You're not asleep, but your mind is wandering. Maybe you got a sketchbook out, or you're tinkering with some poetry, or you're poking around in the garage, sort of fixing stuff, but not really. Or maybe you're just kind of poodling in the garden, seeing what's out there and harvesting stuff, but you're not intentionally, intensively working on a project. That's what I mean when I'm talking about leisure time. And I think Sabbath really is a combination of rest, restorative rest, get you ready for what's next, rest, but it's also got a heavy component of leisure to it. Time for your mind to wander. Time when your time is not being demanded for a certain task or a certain project or in a certain direction, but you can kind of wander about. So for me, this sabbatical had a lot of leisure in it and a lot of rest. I slept hard, particularly the first few weeks. And then it took me a while to connect with that leisure groove, to let my mind wander, to not be just always, oh, there's something else on my to-do list. Oh, I meant to do that. Instead, it just took me a while to kind of settle into being able to sit in the garden with a book for a few hours, being able to kind of wander the garden and just notice what God is doing. Because here's the key point about Sabbath that I think is really important. When I'm thinking about Sabbath, I'm thinking about leisure and I'm thinking about rest, but I'm also thinking about Sabbath in two ways. Sabbath is me stopping work and noticing the work that God continues to do in creation. And I struggle with that. As you know, I'm a gardener. I love being out in the garden, but I will confess to you, I often go out in the garden with a list of things I'm trying to get done before the sun sets or before it's lunchtime or before my next appointment. And so I go out there with a tray of seedlings to plant, and the goal is get them all in there. Or I go out there to plant all these seeds and I got a list of what they are, and my goal is to plant them and get them ready to go. Or my goal is to weed this bed and this bed before lunch. I have a kind of to-do list oriented approach to the garden sometimes. But to me, the command to stop working is a command to go out in the garden, not to work it, but to go out in the garden to sit and notice and enjoy it. To me, that's what Sabbath is about. It's about noticing the work that God is doing all around us, the growth that God is giving to us all the time, noticing the beauty of what God is creating. As a reminder that it's not all on us what we do. God is always giving, growing, and there's beauty in that creation. Noticing that is a part of what Sabbath is all about. In my thinking and pondering and free associating, I did a lot of thinking about limits and boundaries, and particularly about limits and boundaries being not just bad things, but helpful things. So I will tell you, I often have a sense that a boundary is something that we should move. If I rode this climb on my bike in 20 minutes, I want to do it in 19 this time, right? We want to get better at what we're doing. We sometimes think if the stewardship campaign was this level last year, we're going to ratchet it up 5% this year. So we have this sense that like a boundary is there to be moved or pressed up against. But some of what I learned in this sabbatical was about embracing boundaries as those things that actually give you life. Like the margins around the page that helps it be easier for you to read what's on the page. Our attention boundaries in our lives help focus our attention and enjoyment on life. Here's a practical example. In doing all this bike riding, I had this idea to do what was called a credit card ride on the bicycle, which is you get on your cycling kit, you got in your pockets your wallet with your credit card in it. You ride all day and you stop and stay somewhere. You get food along the way. You wake up in the morning. Oh, you wash your cycling stuff in the sink. You wake up in the morning, get on the bike again, and ride to the next place. I had this idea particularly from here, and I mapped it all out that I'd leave from my house here in just north of Albuquerque, and I'd ride to Santa Fe, spend the night at Bishop's Ridge, and then the next day I'd wake up and I'd go from Bishop's Ridge the high road to Taos, because I always wanted to bike the high road to Taos. It's one of the most beautiful roads I've ever been on. The thought was then I'd get to Taos and I'd sleep there, rest and everything, get up the next day and I'd ride back down the high road and then do the climb up to Los Alamos, stay in Los Alamos, maybe White Rock, somewhere like that. And then I'd finish the thing by riding over the back of the Jemez down through San Isidro and then home. I thought, well, I could probably do it in 5 or 6 days. But then I thought, well, I'll be 53 this year. Maybe don't push it. Spread it out. Do it in 7 or 8 days. Maybe rest for a day or two and then ride the next stretch or ride half a stretch or whatever, that kind of a thing. So I've been training. I've been riding longer hours, and I really enjoyed those longer hours on the bike. And I finally thought, all right, I'm ready to go. So I'm gonna practice. I'm gonna do 100 miles in, with some good climbing in there to get myself ready. But instead of just embarking on this multiple leg journey, I'm just going to ride an out and back from my house, and we're going to see how that did. So and I did it. I rode. It was about 7.5, 8 hours, something like that. Got home, went to sleep, woke up the next morning, and I thought, I do not want to get on the bike again today. It was a very clear limit. In theory, in my head, I like the idea and concept of doing this multiple day journey. In actuality, that is not what I want to do with my time. And so I have been embracing some shorter rides, not all day kind of rides, but some days not riding at all, but just sitting and reading instead. And really being attentive to the limits in my life. And in the sabbatical, those limits also involve my vocation and call to be the bishop of the Diocese of the Rio Grande. So one of the limits is I'm on sabbatical, but I am going to go to EYE. There's a limit on my rest because of my commitment to the young people of the diocese. Instead of seeing that as, oh, I want to be on sabbatical, but instead I have to go to work, realizing that limit as a gift helps it not feel like stress. And so I come back from the sabbatical with hopefully some greater awareness not only of my own physical limitations, the limitations on my interests in being a long-range cyclist, but also with a sense that some of the limits that we encounter in our life with God are there not to be overcome, but to be embraced as the margin on the page that focuses on our life to come. I could have spent this sabbatical training and actually accomplishing that multiple leg journey. And I would have felt really satisfied that I had done that. But instead, I have learned to embrace the limitations on that, to spend some more time at home with my family, some more time with leisure and free association. I think we can focus too much on our accomplishments and striving for those accomplishments by removing every obstacle that is in our way. But when we look at the Ten Commandments, and particularly the command to observe the Sabbath day, that is God putting margin and space in our lives so we don't fill the whole page up with our words. Do we take this leisure time? Isn't it a waste of time? I think creativity happens in leisure time. We have better ideas when our minds are allowed to wander. And the more you have a habit of allowing your mind wander, the better able your brain is at making those creative leaps and thinking more deeply. That leisure time is critical for clergy because of the preaching creativity that's required all the time, but also because of the creative empathy that's required for good pastoral care. I think it's important not just for clergy, but for all leaders to be able to have time to free associate and to imagine new possibilities. But it's not important just for leaders either. It's important for all human beings because we are created in the image of God and we are created to be creative. It's a part of what makes life worth living is not only creating things, participating in creation, but also to enjoy the creations of others and to enjoy the creations of God. Life is about way more than work. It's about the creative energy and creative process. We need to do that as a spiritual practice and as a spiritual discipline. Unfold. Diocesan Convention, where you'll hear more about what I've been thinking about and how I've been growing as your bishop during this sabbatical time. I am renewed and refreshed. I'm grateful to be your bishop, and I'm looking forward to the years we have together ahead.